Going live, I think.
It says meeting is now streaming live on Facebook.
I'm not done there. I'm still directing.
It says live.
Okay, there you go. So here we are. I'm assuming we're live. Or at least hoping we're live. If anybody wants to let me know if we're live, I'll take it. Let me just turn this screen on and then I'll do my introduction. Because this doesn't have us live. Live video. Still says starting soon. Am I live? Somebody tell me. It says live on Facebook. So I'm going to give this one more second to double check and then we'll go. So if anybody's watching, please stand by. And athletic training. For events. Corked. Live video. It still says starting soon.
Hmm.
Okay, I'm going to put it out there for anybody that's listening. Hello. Live video. I'm going to put it out there to see if anybody can actually hear us as I'm mumbling away.
That's okay.
Am I live? And hopefully they'll respond and then we'll start. Anybody? Yep, okay, I am. So here we go. Let me pull that up one more time or have people text. Okay, so sorry for that delay. I wasn't sure if we were live or not. This is my first time hosting a Facebook Live event. So quick introductions. My name's Neela. A new board member on the Women in Athletic Training Board. And for National Athletic Training Month, we're highlighting and celebrating women athletic trainers in emerging settings. So tonight's guest is Elaine Winslow-Redmond. I have known Elaine for many years, long before, as I told her before, long before either of us had to wear these to be able to see, when she was in the athletic training program at Montclair State, correct?
Yep.
At Montclair State.
Yeah, and Columbia, both.
And Columbia. She did rotations through Columbia Athletics where I was working with football and women's basketball. So she spent some time with us there. And as I mentioned to her earlier, I also knew her because she was a bartender at one of my watering holes before I was drinking wine out of a glass. So cheers to the Raccoon Lodge. But
Cheers.
But Elaine is was the head athletic trainer and director of wellness services for the Radio City Rockettes. Is that the correct title?
That's it.
Okay. So for those of you that have ever seen the Rockettes or seen the Christmas show or seen them on TV, you can understand, their need for having an athletic trainer, but I'll let her go into more details on that. So you've been, in my mind, you're a pioneer in the world of performing arts and athletic training. You've been with the Rockettes long before the term emerging setting was created. Take us through, how you ended up working in the performing arts and how you ended up working with the Radio City Rockettes.
Sure. Well, for all purposes for the story, I actually was also a rockette. So I was dancing for many years, and I had an injury, and I met this wonderful athletic trainer who helped me through the rehab stages of my injury and introduced me to the profession. So that was while I was in Las Vegas. I was dancing with the Rockettes on a tour that ended in Las Vegas. And so I started there and started working at UNLV with football. I just kind of went into the training room and asked around and said, hey, could you use an intern? And they said, sure.
Who doesn't need help with football all the time?
Right. I mean, and I also was able to enroll in some classes and start my athletic training degree there initially. So I was going to school in the mornings and then working in the show in the evenings my first year as a rockette. So I really loved the profession, and it kind of stuck with me. And I thought to myself, well, we really should have somebody on site with us to help me with this, rather than people telling me I have to take some time off from this injury. I was getting paid. I had my dream job. I was like, I don't want to take time off. I want to keep dancing. So that kind of sparked the interest and got me thinking. Radio City offered a great program where they offered tuition assistance. So I took advantage of that. And I really wanted to do the Christmas show in New York. So I went from Las Vegas and I moved back to New York and started doing the Christmas show at Radio City. And then I had to apply to a program. At the time, we still had the internship route. So I was very fortunate that I had the opportunity to enroll in a master's degree program at Columbia that was exercise, phys, and nutrition. And then I could do all my athletic training classes wherever. So I did some at Montclair, I did some at UNLV, and then I did the bulk of my education at Columbia, graduating with that degree. But that led me to the athletic training room at Columbia and football again. But it was a good thing.
I remember, and so show my bias, and I apologize. The first day that Jim, the head athletic trainer at Columbia, was like, well, we have a rockette coming to preseason. I'm like, what are you talking about? What are we going to do with a rockette? It's preseason football. I have enough to deal with. I don't need somebody else here just taking up space. But you ended up being great and extremely helpful. And hopefully you learned a lot through.
I sure did. And I somehow fell into all these great mentors along the way. Like it was so fascinating. If you hear all the people that I ended up working with, everybody knows them. It's, it's Jim Gossett, it's you, it's John Davis, it's Mary Kirkland, it's all these like powerhouses, Kyle Wilson at UNLV, like all these powerhouse people in the NATA and part of athletic training profession that it's just really cool that I was lined up with the right people, I think, somehow. Anyway, I pitched the idea.
Yeah. Go into detail on that, because I know when you were with us, part of your master's thesis was, how do I become an athletic trainer for the Radio City Rockettes? So how did that progress?
So I was lucky that while I was on the road, I was very close friends with the producer of the show, and he gave me access to the injury reports. An injury report for a show is really just the stage manager's report on the rundown of the show, but on it, they happen to list all the injuries that might have happened. So he gave me access to 5 years of data. So I took that data and I analyzed it, and I showed that there was, I did like a needs assessment. And that was part of my thesis. I showed this need, and then I outlined a program. I mean, I literally started from athletic training 101, liability, I think it is. The first chapter is what's your, practice act, and know what your liability is, and scope of practice. So I started there, and I wrote an entire program as my thesis. So a needs assessment along with this program. And then I had a couple different avenues on how to pitch the idea to the company. Fortunately, we were owned by Madison Square Garden. So they own the Knicks, the Rangers, Liberty, and the Rockettes.
So
So
you didn't actually have to explain to, hopefully to the higher ups, what an athletic trainer
Correct.
was.
So I was very fortunate that that was already a model that the company used, and all I had to do was show that the dancers were athletes. So that was a huge success because Mr. Dolan agreed. He believes that dancers are in fact athletes, and he wanted his performers to be cared for. So when I finally got it to him, which took several tries, but once he finally was able to see it and digest it and the concept, he agreed to it, and they very seamlessly sort of put me in this position when I was on maternity leave from the Rockettes. So it kind of was a nice progression and transition for me.
And then you didn't go back to the dancing side, did you?
Nope.
Nope.
Best thing I ever did.
So it took that time, obviously, with this pitch to create that program from, from the ground up to what was it, a year ago? You made this pitch, you did your grad work, you created the foundation for a program, and what did it grow into?
Well, it grew into me alone with little help to having, one assistant, into two assistants, into now when I left, there were 5 assistants. We had one overseeing physician, a podiatrist, a dual credential PT, ATC, and our injury rates, we reduced them by almost 80%.
Don't jump ahead. That's a question for later.
Okay.
So,
Sorry.
okay, so let's talk about that a little bit. Talk about the injury rates and prevention. Since you began, obviously, we probably have people listening that want to get into, the push for athletic trainers in the performing arts. What did you see as a result of, since you founded this program?
Well, I mean, I think the most important thing to remember is I was one of them, so I knew what the need was. So I had a good buy-in from the performers, first of all, and that is huge. They have to trust that you know what you're talking about, but I don't think it's any different than walking into, a new football team. You have to get the buy-in from your athletes. So I do think that was really important. But what we were able to accomplish was, we have repetitive stress injuries. We knew they were going to be repetitive stress. Everybody's doing the same choreography. The patterns of injury were very similar. And we designed great programs that targeted, those top, 3 to 5 injuries. And we would educate the dancers, and we didn't do it for them. We gave them the tools to do it themselves, but they listened. And I think as a result, the performers started learning how to treat themselves more like athletes, which I think is they often were suffering as dancers and didn't know that there were these services. So they were grateful.
Right. And I'm sure through that they learned, so we're seeing now that, the benefits of, injury prevention and weight training and strength training to be able to do, your performance or sport that you want to do, and how that can help you, prevent injury.
Yeah. And we're so fortunate that we ended up, through the whole program success, they built us a whole training facility. We had a gym. We were teaching women how to squat, dancers how to squat, we were really able to give them the fundamentals of balancing their flexibility with strength, which sometimes you struggle with the opposite. You're usually trying to get your athletes to stretch because they're so tight, whereas the dancers are just the opposite.
Okay, so that's interesting. That segues into, my next question is, what makes this setting different than what we'll call the traditional, athletic setting, and what makes your athletes different than, what we perceive of a typical, sports-based athlete?
I mean, I think the main difference is the repetitive stress part of what we do versus other, depending on the sport. Other sports, there's a lot more acute injuries that you're seeing in a traditional setting. And the repetitive stress injuries for us are real. I mean, they're very difficult to overcome. And then the other thing about those injuries is that they the difference of managing them in season is tough because we don't really have like a preseason. We have a rehearsal season and then we're in shows, and managing those injuries is different than what you would think. So you can't do a ton of manual therapy on these dancers, even though in that setting you would think, oh, you're going to use all your manual therapy technique. You can't, because you're going to agitate the muscle too much. And they have to do up to 17 shows in 1 week. And they really need recovery strategies. That's the most important part of the job that I was doing, is recovery strategies were the key to our success.
So you mentioned 17 shows a week. What were, walk people here through a day in the life of a Radio City Rockette, or I should say a week in the life of a Radio City Rockette, maybe, in that September to November schedule, but then that
Right.
November to January schedule, which is just mayhem and madness.
Right. So they usually start, late September, early October with rehearsals. Those are 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., typically 6 days a week. So they have one day off, and they progressively get intense through the rehearsal process once they ramp up to getting to like their technical rehearsals, because they're trying to build their stamina. So they get them ramped up and they're ready to go, and then they sort of back off with these tech rehearsals. So we had a lot of issues with them deconditioning in that 10-day period of tech rehearsals, because that process is very slow. And then they get slammed with, okay, your first show, your first week of shows, even if they're previews, you could be doing 4 shows on your first, your day after opening night.
And how long is a show? Like, how long would each performer be on stage potentially?
So the show is 90 minutes, and our Rockettes were typically on stage for 45 of the 90. And they were usually kicking at the end of every number that they were doing. So their intensity increases as they go. So there's a huge fatigue factor. And if you think about other sports like basketball, even if you look at somebody like LeBron, he's maybe playing 45 minutes, but how many games in a week is he playing, even if it's playoffs? He's not doing that 17 times. Right. And their practices may be a light practice to, accommodate their recovery. We didn't have that luxury. They had to perform at 100% for 90 minutes, 45 of which they were actually dancing 17 times a week.
Right. But of that 45 minutes of downtime, they're also scrambling around, having costume changes, wardrobe changes. They're not sitting on the bench getting water.
They are not. And that's an interesting fact. We ended up having to pass water because they had so little time to get their own water, that we started, on the sides of the stage with Gatorade waters and just passing them just to make sure they were hydrating enough, because we were seeing these crazy dehydration numbers, which who would have thought that was an issue? But they're in costumes, they're sweating, they're under the lights. There's all those factors that are a little bit different than outdoor factors,
and makeup and headdress and all of those things. So if people watching haven't seen the Radio City Rockettes, after this, it's worth, Googling some videos to see what that kick line looks like, or, obviously the kick line is one of the most famous things. And then the wooden soldier, which we actually put a still picture of that in before your talk. You could see that. It's an amazing show. So if you're ever in New York City, definitely go see it. Again, for those watching live, we're with Elaine Winslow-Redmond, athletic trainer for the Radio City Rockettes, and we'll get into some other performing arts AT work that she's done. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the comment box, and I'll do my best to look over and try and get her to answer some of them. So we got the day in the life, or a week in the life of the Rockette. What about the athletic trainer for the Rockettes? What does that week look like during, during the rehearsals and then into the show season?
Well, the job itself is a lot of hours. I tried out over the years to make it more reasonable so that I wasn't overworking my staff and to the best of our ability, but it's really challenging because we have to be there an hour before the rehearsal starts, because we're doing the usual taping everybody and doing all of our prevention stuff, treating the mornings if necessary. Then there's a half an hour. So we do our morning treatments. We at the same time are cleaning, prepping, changing out whirlpools, doing all the things that you would have to do to maintain your records. We're doing our record keeping, our injury tracking, all that stuff. And then the Rockettes go an hour and 20 minutes with a break, and then another hour and 20 with a lunch break for an hour. And, in the breaks, you could have people running in for something. And then the lunch break hour, we either have one of the doctors in-house or physical therapy, or we're treating ourselves, any number of performers. And then at the end of the day, we have to stay for icing and cool down and all that stuff. So, our typical, their 7-hour day is a 9-hour day for us.
Right.
And so that's, like it is in any training facility. Show days are a bit different. We come in an hour and a half before the show starts, anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours to get everything ready. And then we get a half an hour to ourselves to finish our notes and do what we have to. Then we have to run on stage.
I spoil you rotten.
Yeah, usually one person with a walkie, one person upstairs in the training room, so that if there's an injury on stage, you can have a person from upstairs come down and help you, and vice versa. And then they're treating, as soon as the show comes down, they're treating in the only hour that they have before the next show, because there's only a half an hour to an hour between shows, and then they do it all over again. And that's anywhere from 4 to 5 and sometimes 6 times a day.
Yep.
Long days.
Madness. So it's like you read all of my questions ahead of time. What,
Sorry.
we all know what happens when, an athletic trainer or an athlete gets hurt on the football field. You see the athletic trainer and medical staff go run out, do an assessment, bring them onto the sideline, do a further evaluation. What happens if one of the Rockettes gets injured, from minor to major, on stage during a performance?
Well, the performers know that they've got to get themselves off stage. They know that. If they're incapable of getting themselves off stage, the stage manager knows they got to stop the show. So there's a production stage manager. Typically, the athletic trainer is covering the show from right close to them so that they have good communication, but we also have walkie. And we will not go on stage unless asked.
Right.
At any time. So typically, it's never happened. We don't go on stage. I'm going to knock on something, but
Yes, I got it for you.
If you see me on stage, it's really bad.
Well, I was actually at a show when somebody on stage, it was not the Rockettes, it was just a regular Broadway performance. And somebody did get injured and they dropped the screen and we sat there and that was it. And I was in the audience and I'm like, maybe they need me. Like, should I go help? Like, I know they probably have EMS somewhere, but maybe they need help.
Yeah, they do.
I would say I didn't spring out of my seat and go offer, but maybe I should have. What other?
That brings up an interesting case that we had our very last show last year, actually. One of our Rockettes in the last 5 minutes of the show, the last show of the season, tore her ACL. And she continued to dance successfully. She
wow.
did.
Now I have visions of what is it? It's Catherine O'Hara in
She did the last kick line. She did it successfully. Like I still can't believe it.
Wow, which is an extensive kick line. And that's wow.
It was, I actually have told some of my other athletes that story and they just can't, some of them who have had ACL injuries and they just can't believe it.
No, that's amazing. Talked about overuse. What overuse injuries do you see specifically?
We see,
we can think of like the ankles or foot stress fractures, but I'm sure there's other body parts. It's a pretty dynamic performance.
We see a lot of FHL tendonitis, a lot of it, like, especially I think, and we think that the reason being is they wear high heel shoes and they are expected to point their foot in the shoe. And we think it's that great toe just having to forcefully point against resistance of the shoe all the time that they develop this FHL tendonitis. We've gotten a really good kind of athletic training toolkit to help them prevent it. And we have a lot of great treatment strategies. And most of our tendinitises, we actually are able to keep them dancing through. I mean, even the bad cases, we're able to keep them dancing for the most part. And we're fortunate in that respect. But it's because we see it a lot. And so we had a lot of chances to practice, I guess.
Right. And I remember you saying some things initially, you know, even like, you know, shoulder neck things, like, again, going back to the wooden soldier march, like they're wearing this huge hat that.
Yeah, neck is really common and it's really hard to treat because everything they do is not only with a heavy hat on, but also sharp motion. So they're, you know, the sharp motion of their head, if they're not warmed up or prepared, can easily, you know, give them a wry neck right away.
Do I have questions coming in? Not yet. No, that's not it. Okay. So what else? I know you were with the Rockettes obviously for 16 years. Have you worked other performing arts and other avenues of performing arts?
I worked for a few years. I worked with Blue Man Group. We started a program with all 5 of their shows around the country.
Wow,
That
that's
was
different.
sort of before the whole recession happened. It was many years ago. But that was interesting, different, more musician related injuries, but we had a whole, it was great. It was like a true athletic training program. Like every Blue Man that got hired in the audition process had to go through a pre-participation screening right after they were hired. And I had to sign them off to their company and say, hey, here's their prevention program. And then I would send them to whatever city they were going. And then the athletic trainers in those cities would maintain those programs for them.
Wow.
So it wasn't like a full-time position for all of the ATs that were working them, but as the need, you know, was there, they started using them more and more and more. So that was a great program.
That's a much louder show than the Rockettes. I've
It's
seen that.
louder. Yeah. And you know, there were interesting things, like a lot of them, there was a lot of like ergonomic things we did. So I would go in and I actually did a lecture for them on how to carry the Jell-O mold from the freezer through, and it was New York City. So, you know, buildings and theaters in New York City, if any of you are familiar with, you know, downtown and where Blue Man Group is, they had to get it from this freezer, like up a little thing of stairs, across a threshold and down another set of stairs. And I had to teach them all how to properly lift to get the Jell-O mold. It was a good one.
Life in general in New York City, it's not like you just drive your car up to the front door and you walk in the, you know, and there you are. Everything takes a little bit more effort.
Sure does.
Did you have to, like, we talked before about, or I was speaking with somebody earlier about, you know, the rigors in the performing arts versus the rigors in, you know, traditional athletics, football. And football isn't run now like it was in the 1960s. We fortunately had medical professionals step in and say, you shouldn't keep doing this. You're seeing these same injuries. Let's make adjustments. We may need, you know, they may need a lighter practice. They may need a day off. They may not be able to play, you know, 2 or 3 games in a week. Not that you see that in football, but did you have any communication with production saying, you know what, maybe there should be a cap on how many performances somebody can be in?
We actually did. We made huge strides in that area. As the choreography started to get more challenging, we started to advise them on certain things, injury patterns and things that we were seeing. And one of the things we were able to get is a cap at 5 shows a day for any one company. So now they split it, which is huge. And we fought really hard for that. So we were able to at least get that. And then the other thing that we did that was interesting was during rehearsals, we would have, like, they would do back-to-back rehearsals of certain numbers. So for example, we have a Santa number where they ring bells and they do this motion with their hands. And then the next rehearsal would be a rehearsal, let's say they had a video game number in for a few years and they would have to use these wands. And the year that they did the back-to-back rehearsals of those 2 numbers, everybody was having wrist tendonitis, like acute, like tenosynovitis, and really raging. And some of them it took us the whole season to get rid of. So we made the recommendation to the artistic director and she made a change in the rehearsal schedule and how they rehearsed those numbers. So that was a big win for us.
That's huge. And I mean, that in general is worth having the expertise, at the table, the expert at the table to say, and this is obviously it's MSG, it's a business.
Yes.
So you keeping injury rates low and downtime low saves them money. And I'm sure for the dancers, they want to be performing because that's how they get paid.
Correct. Yeah.
I've gone back and forth, calling them athletes, dancers. What is their preferred term? Do you call them athletes? Do you call them performers? Do you call them dancers? How would you classify the people that you work with?
We usually use the term performers, and I usually like to coin it when I talk to athletic trainers as performing athletes. It was interesting years ago when, before emerging practices was called this, it was called the Council on Employment. And that I remember I went in my first meeting, and it was when we had all the joint meetings, and we did them all together in Dallas, actually. And I was there, and they had somebody from the military there, and the two of us were asked to present on our settings. So he presented before I did. It was Colonel Brian McGuire.
Yep.
He did his, and then I did mine second. And he had coined the term warrior athletes. I had coined the term performing athletes. And then when you looked at our program side by side, everybody in the room was like, it's almost identical. Like everything that he said, I said, and it was like we didn't even know each other.
Wow.
So it was really fascinating. And that's when I knew, I was like, this is great. Like all these emerging practices, this is terrific.
And all these under, or at the time underserved, performing athletes or warriors that, that are now getting the advantage and hopefully growing advantage of
Yes.
our expertise. So who else, you worked with the Rockettes being Madison Square Garden production company. You worked under the MSG umbrella. Did you work with some of the other athletic trainers there? And what differences did you talk about, again, between performing athletes and then maybe, competitive athletes?
Well, the way that it's set up, the sports and entertainment was under the same umbrella when I was there. I think it's since been divided, but sports and entertainment were the same, but not the same. So although we were under the same company and the same umbrella, I had the same rules to follow, but we didn't have the same medical staff. So
Okay.
the Knicks and the Rangers had their medical staff. And I would say the only interaction we really had was as professional athletic trainers and sharing continuing education ideas and, vendors. We would, share vendors. There was an occasional overlap here and there, but it was rare, that we had overlap. But the other thing that was very similar was that we were under a collective bargaining agreement and had workers' compensation, which is the same for the Knicks and the same for the Rangers. And so being under a CBA and having to follow those rules is a lot different than being in some other traditional setting where you may not have to worry about another set of rules. So.
And then you were saying earlier before we were on the air that also under that umbrella over the years became the Knick City Dancers and some other.
Yes, we were very, very lucky that the Knick City Dancers had a really, really great troupe and very talented group of women. And there was a need there. And through a lot of discussion and finally a really, smart woman who worked over on the Knicks side reached out to me and she said, do you think we could set up a program like you have for the Rockettes for the Knick City Dancers? So I was so lucky. I had Monica Lorenzo, who was one of my interns and one of my former assistants. She was like the perfect athletic trainer for this job. And so I recommended her. She went in there and she took this whole thing over and developed it into this unbelievable athletic training program for the entertainment teams. And then from that grew two other opportunities, one at the Nets and one with the Bulls, where some of my other assistants are working. And it's hugely successful in the entertainment side of the NBA. So it's a whole nother avenue that opened up for us as performing athletes, I guess.
Do you think, obviously having been a Rockette gave you experience into, an insight into the injuries and obviously got you your foot in the door to present this, but do you think that if somebody wanted to go into the performing arts that they would have to have had that experience? Or, I mean, I worked 20 years of Division I football, and other than getting hit once on the sidelines, I did not play football. But I thought I was able to, I don't think that diminished my capabilities on the sidelines. How do you think that works with the performing arts?
I don't think it's necessary. I think it's helpful. I think what is really important is that you're, number one, a really great, smart athletic trainer, and that you can bring something to the table maybe the dancers aren't familiar with from an athletic perspective, something that you can add to their toolbox. And I mean, it is, as far as starting a program, it is helpful to know somebody. I mean, that's really, but isn't that true for everything?
That's true for everything.
I don't know
Exactly.
that that's
It's not what you know, it's who you know.
Yes, excuse me. I think so. And so, but anybody can do it. You just have to apply your knowledge as an athletic trainer to a different, sport. It's just changing the sport that you're working, like they did for racing, NASCAR and other, teams, other emerging settings that are just transferring the knowledge of athletic training into a plan and a program for a different type of athlete.
Okay, so now I'm going to share private information on you. Talk about transferring that knowledge. You had the joy of working your first solo football game the other day.
I did. Isn't that ridiculous? Oh my gosh.
But it's the same thing, you're transfer. You can be nervous going into something because you don't know what to expect, but it's just transferring that, that same knowledge.
Yes. And oh my gosh, I was so lucky. My motto for the day was Band-Aids only. It paid off.
Please don't get hurt. Please don't get hurt.
I was like, just, I got a Band-Aid. You need a Band-Aid. But I much prefer working practices and in the training room with the football players than I do the actual game. But that's just because I was responsible for it, I guess.
Yeah.
But it was great. And the guys all know my history and what I did. So what's nice about that is they're asking me some really great questions that I don't think they would have asked, if they didn't know that. So that's been good.
It's not how can I become a Rockette, or how can I get how can I get on the radio? You have men in there. How do I get into the Radio City Music Show?
I haven't asked that yet, but
give it time.
I know, really.
For people watching or watching, or that are going to watch it later, are there any additional certifications, courses, skill sets that you think would be helpful for somebody that wants to go into the performing arts setting?
Yeah, I do. Although I did mention the manual therapy thing for, is not as effective for us in season. I do think having some manual therapy skills are important. I actually use active release technique, and I'm, full body certified, and I use it all the time. I find it to be extremely beneficial for my performers. I know that a lot of the performing arts athletic trainers are Pilates certified as well, and they use that a lot for their rehab setting. Okay. I didn't have the luxury of rehabbing our performers all the time, especially with our season being so intense, that there wasn't a lot of time for the rehab, and most of them don't live locally, so they would rehab elsewhere. So we never actually dove into that. But I think it's very beneficial, and if I was to do it over again, I would definitely add that. I became an EMT just to transfer care within my theater, because that became a bit of an issue with my performers getting injured. And if the EMTs came into the building and I had them packaged to go, they wouldn't accept my package if I wasn't an EMT. So I did that just for that reason. What else? Those are the main things, I think. And taping techniques, like outside the box taping techniques, like KT tape, and really knowing how to do it, not just slapping it slapping it on, knowing, you know, what the application is going to do and how it's going to help.
Now that's interesting. That right, you're not just, some of it's not just, I mean, we all do the placebo and the feel good, but you also,
Yes,
with taping, you also have to worry about the aesthetics of something
correct.
on stage.
Correct. And that, you know, that's interesting. That brings up a big project that I had worked on way back when. I had been working with a tape company to manufacture skin tone tapes for everyone. So, because I have a lot of diversity and I wanted skin tones that match, because I can't put them on stage if they don't have the right color. And
Right.
so we actually sent them our tights that we wear, you know, for all of our women. And they took the tights colors and they created K-tape that was for different colors.
Really?
And it's out there now. They
You
sell
should have
it.
patented that.
You can
Give
get
the
it at
Winslow tape.
CVS. You can get it at CVS. And what is crazy is now all the companies are starting to catch on and starting to do that. And I just feel so proud that I was able to get that accomplished for my dancers, you know, before it became, you know, a thing to do, you know, and that we had that early on and we were able to help them, you know, wear the tape if they needed it.
Right. I mean, that brings up a whole other issue, you know, growing up, this was the flesh tone crayon. It's like, well, who's flesh? And this is a flesh tone Band-Aid. Well,
right.
Who's flesh? And if it's something, again, if you're performing and something shouldn't be noticeable, that's fast. I didn't realize that you were part of that.
Yeah. And it was nice because we took the girls on stage. We had the women try out different colors, and, you know, I had all kinds of different ethnicities try different colors. And then we picked on the right ones that didn't show under lights. And it was a great project. And the women were so appreciative.
That's awesome. We'll segue into something completely different. Although this is still on the performing arts venue, you've managed to reinvent yourself a little bit during COVID. And that may be another talk for somebody else on how to reinvent yourself, but we'll give that a couple of minutes. And again, I'll throw it out there if anybody has any questions, but then we'll start to wrap it up.
Oh yeah. Reinventing. You want me to go there?
You go there.
All right. Well, so because we didn't have a show last season, in August, they canceled our Christmas Spectacular. We're fingers crossed, hoping to come back, coming this next September, October. While I was still working up until August, we were still planning on trying to have a show last season. And part of that planning, of course, was COVID planning. So I had to dive in deep with all the protocols and know the guidelines. And one of the things I kept seeing in all the union agreements was that they needed this COVID compliance officer to work these shows and to be on site to coordinate all the services that were needed for COVID. So when I finally was let go for the season and didn't know what I was going to do,
Right.
I was able to get another job with an entertainment company working as a COVID compliance officer. So I did several film productions. They were filming some performing arts type things to show their customers. And so I did one in New York. So we worked right downtown Broadway as a COVID compliance officer. I was responsible for coordinating testing and making sure everybody was compliant with the rules. And it was a little more challenging than I expected it to be. I traveled the country.
COVID is all a little more challenging than we all expect it to be.
Yeah. I traveled the country to a couple of different states during COVID, which was also a whole nother thing. But as this COVID compliance person, and I did a bunch of other jobs with them, and you know, that's sort of kind of led into this consulting thing. So I'm sort of doing some performing arts COVID consulting now for productions that want to get up and running for this summer. So it's been nice. It's kept me busy and, you know, relevant, and a high school athletic trainer for
And
a short
employed.
time.
Relevant, employed, all things that matter in day-to-day life.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
So
but
what,
I have to say, on that note, I do have to say, like, for a short time, I sort of lost my way and I was like, am I still going to do athletic training? What am I going to do? And I think what kept me in the profession, which I think is so important to mention, is that like I decided I was going to do like virtual EATA. And I was like, oh, this is why I do this. Like, I just love the community. I love being an athletic trainer. I love all of the people that I know who are athletic trainers. And so it makes me happy. And I said, I can't like sway from this. What am I going to do as a office assistant? I mean,
Right.
that's not going to work for me.
Right. Working.
So-
I mean, none of us went into that, or few of us went into that, to be behind a desk 9 to 5. Like that would,
Yeah.
I see people, I'm like, how do they do that? I don't understand. Like it's, something that doesn't process in my brain for that.
Yeah. And although I was scared to work a football game, I did it. And think about all the people who are scared to work backstage, you just have to figure it out and be smart about your approach. And you can't go in thinking you know everything. You have to go in and be humble, and it works.
And I think that for me, that's one of the most important skills of an athletic trainer is also being creative, because you may have learned how to do something with this equipment or do an evaluation on this table or tape with this tape, and you're going to be at some point in a setting where none of those things exist. And how do you get one roll of tape to last you a season, or no rolls of tape and no rehab equipment, but some bands? Like, how do you make that adjust and still be, a good, effective, and efficient athletic trainer, and just being, creative with the skills in your head?
Absolutely.
And being creative and being a smart ass with your athletes, but that might just be me.
That's you.
So what words of wisdom or advice or pearls do you have for athletic trainers looking to get into performing arts setting?
Let's see. I mean, be prepared, because it's going to be, I think, a little bit challenging coming back from COVID. I'm not sure where the funding is going to come from. And so you have to be very ingenious in thinking about how you're going to get paid. And the one thing I would say is, showing the need is important, but your return on investment is going to be more important. Like, how can these companies benefit from your services, and how can you show that? The one thing I always say too is, if we get in to these like performing arts schools, there's a lot of performing arts universities that are starting to have like an athletic trainer in their traditional setting, but that supports just the dance group.
I always thought of that, like, does Juilliard have anything, or Manhattan School of Music?
Yes,
or
Juilliard actually does, and a few of the others. AMDA has somebody, and the certain schools, Indiana University has a really, really great program. They're one of the first to have started that sort of concept. And one of the ways they did it was, like, the musicians pay for, they pay a fee in their tuition for their musical instrument. Well, they just had the dancers pay a fee for their instrument, which was their physical well-being. And that money went towards, financing the athletic trainer that would help with that department. So there are ways to think about that. So I think to be prepared for the challenge. What else? Pearls of wisdom. The best thing for dancers and all kinds of performers is the sports medicine model. It works the best. I like to call it proactive versus reactive. They're all used to the reactive model, where they go to the doctor and then they're in physical therapy for, however long. And to me, that financially doesn't make any sense. And I quite honestly think it's a conflict of interest. I think if that's the model that they're choosing to use in a show, their injuries are feeding their clinic. Their injuries are feeding. If those performers are injured, their clinic is making money by treating these performers and keeping them out of the show. Whereas for me, I would much prefer having them back in the show, so I could just sit at my desk and drink coffee.
Yeah. I mean, we see that with it, even at the high school setting. Do you work for a clinic that is, you're referring back, or you're working for the school? But working as a medical model, who did you report to? Did you report exclusively to your covering physician, or did you report to stage management, or did you
So
report?
I reported to the senior vice president of production. So the production, whoever oversaw the whole production was who I reported to. And that, but I did have an overseeing physician, but that person was contracted through the show. So that was somebody that I usually would find that was qualified to work with performing arts, because I needed medical guidance also. I needed, an avenue to get quick referrals. I needed somebody to come in-house for us and help us on a weekly basis. We couldn't do it all ourselves. So the way it's set up is, although I oversaw and directed the program, I worked with all of these other specialties as a team. We were a really great integrated medical team that worked well together.
That's awesome. So what was your favorite? Well, we'll end with this. We won't end with the worst thing. What was your favorite thing or the best thing about being the athletic trainer for the Rockettes?
Oh, wow. What was that? Well, oh gosh. I think like seeing many of the performers like dance for years, like the longevity of some of my performers and how they got better with time.
I'm going to interrupt you quick because I'm good with that. Explain to some people watching that the age range again that they may not know within the Rockettes, because it's impressive.
You have to be at least 18 to start, but we have women in their mid 40s now. And in the past, we had women who were in their 50s. But then the choreography got much more challenging and difficult, like every sport, like everything, and so it was harder to hang on. But now I see this pattern where the women who have longevity are better than ever, like full on Tom Brady's, like they're all like those that are, in their mid 40s are not my injured dancers. They are the ones that are taking care of their body and know how to do this.
Well, they buy into your system, hopefully.
And I have so much respect for all of them. And I think that that's the most rewarding part of the job, is seeing the success of other people. Hopefully because of what you provided them or taught them or whatever.
Anything else you want to add? Again, I'm giving a last call for questions, and hopefully there aren't any coming in that I don't see. I've got more systems up here and running than I know what to do with. I've got phones, I've got a side computer, I've got this computer. I'm not that tech savvy to make this all work, but I do have a bottle of wine, so it all works better with that. So I don't see any questions. So what would be your summaries? Give us a summary of, again, the emergent settings and performing arts.
I would say to make sure, well, it's incredibly rewarding. All of these emerging settings have, these athletes who aren't traditionally used to having somebody like an athletic trainer there to support them. So they're all extremely grateful for the work that you do. And although you have those tough times and you have your divas and you have your moments, don't we all? Yes. Ultimately, they are so incredibly appreciative of the work that you do. And so you feel valued. And I think that's what's important. And it's exciting. It's an exciting atmosphere. It's figuring things out that you, like you had said before, is thinking outside the box and MacGyvering and changing and all those things. And that makes it interesting every single day, along with, a little bit of drama here and there.
Well, there's whether you're in drama or not, there's always a little bit of drama here and there.
A little bit of drama.
So I said you were a pioneer. How many ATs do you think worked in performing arts before you set this stage?
Well, there are several. I mean, Jackie House did it in Cincinnati with Cincinnati Ballet. Very similar story to myself. She was a dancer with the ballet and sort of transitioned into the role. So she really did it before I did. Steve McCauley, who was working at La Rev in Las Vegas up until recently, but he was doing the performing arts thing in Las Vegas before Cirque du Soleil showed up. Like he was doing that a long time ago. Mary Jean Liederbach was doing it in New York. She was in New York and she's still at the Harkness Center, and they have a great program over at the Harkness Center. And they don't have as many ATs, but the ones that they have are working now in performing arts. So, there's a lot of people who were doing this first. It's just that I was able to convince a very large company who had a sports and entertainment, division to go all out for a group of women that were well-deserved. And it's a show that's part of a tradition in New York and quite frankly, around the country when we were touring. And they let me take it and run. And so I was very, very fortunate to have had that opportunity.
Well, I will say they are very fortunate to have had you.
Thank
And
you.
hopefully we'll be fortunate to continue to have you
Yeah, I hope so.
and the staff that you've created.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta finish what I started, right?
What?
I gotta finish what I started. Like,
Yeah,
come
you do.
on.
Because I saw her on stage as a Rockette, as
Oh,
well as coming to visit behind the stage when I took, when I took the kiddies there to see a show. So you've run an impressive program.
thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Proud to have had you work with me then. And here's
Oh.
now here's the high school sports.
I know. Woo! I'm surviving.
Exactly.
Don't jinx me. Don't jinx me. Band-Aids
Oh,
only.
never
Band-Aids
jinx
only.
you. So I'm going to sign off with Elaine now. If people have questions, put them forth and I'll try and get them to her. Elaine is not on Facebook, so she is not a member of Watt, but she is friends with people that are in Watt. So
Yeah.
we could be in touch. Well, have a great night. Thank you so much for doing this. It was fun. It was a lot. And it was good to see you. I haven't seen you in too long.
Yeah, that's great.
So this summer down on the Jersey Shore.
I'm all about it.
Okay.
All right.
Have a good night, my friend.
Thanks.
I'll
You
talk
too.
to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.